Philosophers talk to our times, towards an ethnography of a self-poisoning mind. I'll be being about another week of this, I think, before we'll go off and do proper philosophy again. It's starting to bubble up in my head and cannot be ignored. I hope it goes without saying that AI, amongst many of its other things, is an attempt to liberalise, both in the sense of rendering open to democracy, God help us, and also of capitalising, so both senses of the word. One of the last bastions that had defied the standard capitalist, synthesis in the word liberal, of that thing that gets called freedom and that thing that gets called consumerism. I mean, humans' ability to create. Whether that creation is artistic or whether that creation is research-based. You see, I have a lot of friends of artists in my life. I adore visual art. And I've sat and watched them create paintings, sometimes literally over years. And the real problem, of course, is that if you create that way, you might create a landscape of light in which you can lose yourself in a dream of clarity and of colours that ricochet one to the other. You might create stories that mix modern and ancient imagery and tell a story far better than I ever could in a single image that opens out onto myriad possible worlds, allows you to tell very many narratives. Or you might capture light in a hedgerow, the track of where the fox has just been, that changes the way I understand what it is to look under bush and briar and look for the fae and describe them. All this is very possible and utterly wonderful, and up to now really impossible to price. An artist could not price their work, not sensibly. If something takes you 1,000 hours and you don't know whether you've quite completed it, what's your hourly rate? Because you can guarantee nobody could pay it, unless you're very famous, in which case everybody will pay it, and more so. One of the joys of art is why it's always been open to scams, always been open to pyramid schemes, to the likes of Saatchi, buying stuff that is all right. It's not awful, but I would always just personally put it on the also ran level of art, but then bigging it up to the price becomes hugely valuable. So it becomes a work of art because of its price. All that jazz. And that's actually because traditionally art has not been priceable. It's one of those things that radicals end up going to just because they avoid capitalism. It's like peasant production here in France. The same is of course true, traditionally, for research. Even research in drug companies can take years and years and years. And so it becomes very difficult to know how to price the product. And what you do, of course, is you collectivise the prices to make them all just about affordable. Because research is unpredictable. You never really know where it will lead or what it will go to. It's difficult. It's hard. All the more so. Philosophy, research. And the entire point, if you think about it, of a PhD is to produce something that cannot be bought. That you spend the hours of your life crafting, that nobody might ever read. That it is always of more value than you could ever have been paid for it. And yet from which you might be able to pull out a career teaching, researching, perhaps, never very lucrative. It's a moment then that cannot be costed. An act that defies simple marketization. It's one of the very many reasons, and there are very many, that a certain sort of the business entrepreneur classes have always viewed academics in suspicion, or artists, because right at the heart they have something that is an anathema. They are pursuing a line that is both elite in that I'm no visual artist. Oh, I can make a mask and I can describe an emotion in a mask like that's nobody's business. But if you wanted me to paint the scene, you'd get fingered daubs on oil with a good eye for colour but none for form. The point is that to be able to draw something is a real skill, a real difficult skill. To be able to fix the perspectives, to get the right colour, it's genuinely challenging for the mind. And therefore, not only is it non-capitalist, it is necessarily rather elitist, because people like me would never be able to do it. Likewise, genuine research into vaccines, let's grab the nettle, is bloody complicated and bloody difficult. Why? Because the maths is difficult. I've taught A-level maths for 25 years. Sorry, it always moves me that, it's too long, I taught it for. And I just about at the end of A-level got up to the student T distribution. And the way you have to model to understand the kind of statistics that's necessary for base level research in science. And then, of course, you have to discover what you have to realise what it is that you've produced, which is not proof. It's very hard to prove things. It's much easier to disprove the negative, because that's just the way proof works. And one of the reasons I always say that we end up with a drug-based medical pharmacological industry. Yes, you could say it's the one that's very easy to capitalise. That is true, but that's not the reason that it's there. Capitalisation came later. It's actually because the research can be finished, completed, relatively straightforwardly, with a budget that is not absolutely impossible. Okay, which means that, and then replicated by others, so that you actually have something that conforms to the normal way we would understand science. But the entire point about it is that it is elitist, and that I barely understand the maths that's necessary to be able to understand in order to be able to do the research. Oh, you can do the research, you can gather the figures, you can trust them you can give them to your mathematical buddy, and we can sit and crunch them and give you the results. But unless you understand what those results are, you won't understand what you found, and that makes it all rather difficult. That's why don't know about you, but I always get a sinking feeling in the very pit of my stomach when somebody says they've been doing their own research. Because, call me a snob, and I don't mind, I am a snob. But having spent a lifetime reading and a lifetime mucking about with art and not being particularly good at art, I'm good at storytelling, art's different. But being good at certain types of research and very bad at others, I'm very aware of where I am in a whole set of pecking orders. I'm very aware of what I can do and what I can't do. It creates an aristocracy of, you see, real research, like real art, creates an aristocracy of knowledge. It's very much the knowledge of the ancien regime. If the ancien regime was not as moribund, bankrupt thing that it actually was, and was what it dreamt to be. Something about quality, something about making choices. But it didn't conform very well to capitalism. Not really. Oh, you could pastiche it. And with derivative drugs, you could have a whole sequence of drugs that you could predict it was quite likely that one or t'other of them would work. And you could run through them. But you could never know that it would work. Likewise, with originality. I always say the problem with originality is it's frig difficult. When you have an idea, the first idea that you have, you can bet your bottom dollar is the idea that absolutely everyone has had. Absolutely everyone. From the sideboard to the fender to my dog are there, if she thought about it for a moment, which she never does. And so you then always have to have another idea. And this is not dialectic. It's not, you have to, because you then have to have a comment which could, another second idea. And that second idea won't be original. And the third one won't be. And you have to keep on going until at last You perfect the idea and you pull it somewhere else. And then you can begin to understand the world differently. But it takes a lot of time, a lot of reading, and a lot of effort. It's terribly easy to produce derivative things and to think that they are wonderful. You see where AI fits in all of this, you see. One of the things it does, you go down to your local card merchant, and unless they're real quality card merchants, or you're buying directly from the artisan in the market, the images are AI. And the point is, for those of you who are not caught up in the world of the artist, you might not be able to tell the difference terribly much. And you could say, well, that's just that proves the devaluing of art. No, it doesn't. Because if you had the two next to each other, if you actually had a painting that was genuinely being experimental in the moment of its experiment, and you had the AI production, you would know the relative difference between them. But if you're giving them as simply final product, where the AI is pastiching the final product of an artist, sometimes it's hard to tell them actually apart. I would flatter myself I could. I could certainly flatter. I would certainly do it if I talked to the artist. Absolutely, because the process that gets you there is different. And the point about also art, I would say, is that part of what you're doing is you're always wrestling with the medium. I've never known an artist totally happy with their painting. It doesn't work that way, because the medium you're using, the oils, always gets in the way of what you want to say. And actually, for me, that creates the art. It is that struggle, that sculpture into being. All that stuff, all that difficult stuff where things can't be mass-produced. Well, until AI comes along and says, well, we can mass-produce it. It might not be quite the same, but you won't be able to tell the difference, so who cares? Likewise, we're going to get a generation of AI-based researchers who basically have only done what they research on AI. And what the fudge does that even mean? The dream, of course, is that AI will be able to knock off all the routine drug researchers, to be able to run through experiments and rule in likely drugs and rule out likely undrugs, rule out other drugs. Now, in terms of drug research, when you are deliberately producing for a product, I personally, as long as you're not going to fuck the environment too badly in producing it, might not have too much trouble with that. But if you're trying to understand the way populations work, and you're trying to explain that to others, I do have a problem with it. Because unless everybody's AI commits to always using the T distribution and doing the maths itself as it explains it, and explaining what the maths means, which I see no evidence that it has to do, what you're going to end up with is not research at all. You're going to end up with endless qualitative accounts, endless narrative accounts, and individuals who get lost inside the narrative that their AI has produced. That because it did an effort, because they asked a question, they mistake for actual research. Likewise with philosophy. I occasionally get AI to write essays on Spinoza, and it's really very bad. It's very bad from my own perspective, because of course from my own perspective, I am interested in ripping Spinoza into saying things he hasn't said before. And that's not what it does. And so it doesn't do what the essence, I'll come back to this, probably the end of this week, the essence of what I would tend to think lay in of thought, which is that ability to take you in a different direction, to invent a new language, to allow a thinker to say something that they may not quite have said, or that they only also said. And then to make it work, and the making of it working, so that you're not telling lies, is the really complicated bit. The bit I think I've never seen any evidence that it can do it. I shall put it that way. Maybe you've got the authors to do it, but everything I have seen has always been highly derivative. But the point about all of this is that it's all costed anyway, because the point about AI, it's a costed thing. There's a certain amount of credit for each time you use it. A certain amount of power, perhaps, but a certain amount of money that is earned. So it turns all research into something that you can directly quantify and already have, into an algorithm that can be pre-known. It allows you to price out art before it is ever done. It conquers that final enigma of humanity that had defied liberal identity. The world of the artist, the world of the scientist, the world of the researcher. It all becomes eminently quantifiable. So it's a very queer move. You could see why capitalism would think, wow. I think it's Negri who argued, it was in Empire, which isn't a book I like, but he had a very good argument in it, that capitalism only lasts as long as it can find non-capitalists to gradually colonize. And of course, art and research has been one of the great spaces that have never been truly colonized by capitalists, because its very production implied non-capitalization. And now, of course, we can render it totally open to capitalism. Which makes people money, a lot of money, because this is a new territory. It's like discovering America, but conceptual, or opening up a new empire. Although it won't last terribly long, because you'll probably be able to occupy it very, very quickly. And then we'll go, what then? As we lose sight of what research used to be, and certainly what art always has been. Which might be all right if you wanted to create art in your own home, without too much effort, I suppose. But for those of us who like getting glitter on our hands, and who have friends whose entire livelihoods have involved producing 3 or 4 wonderful paintings, it feels the strangest sort of travesty.